And there was something about the way that Ditko handled a superhero in Spider-Man which made it a feature of the urban landscape. In Superman and Batman, buildings were just to be flown past. But as with Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko brought this quality to his cityscapes that had real character. It was a slightly paranoid and shadowy character, but that suited very much the kind of introspective, often melancholy mood of a lot of those early Spider-Man episodes.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man.
New York was an inspiration for Ditko. In 1953, he moved there from a small mining town in Pennsylvania and made it his and Spider-Man's home.
Here comes the Spider-Man.
And it was here that he joined the Cartoonist and Illustrators School. I went uptown to meet his mentor and teacher, one of the true pioneers of the comic book industry, Jerry Robinson.
Well, I guess I'm best known in the comics for my work on Batman. I was one of the three original team. And of course, one of the notable contributions, I suppose, is the creation of the Joker.
It's remarkable.
I have some permanent.
Here we have some of Jerry's covers here. Look at that. That's got to be the definitive.
A lot of fans like that one best.
I love this one. Of course, that's a classic image. Jerry taught Steve in the 50s, and even then he noticed Steve's phenomenal ability.
Well, he was serious about the art. He was serious about learning. He was dedicated to learning. He was dedicated to becoming a storyteller, a visual storyteller.
As part of the course, Jerry would find work for the students in the industry.
I wanted to introduce the artists to doing professional work as early as possible. That's the best way to learn, is to do something and then see your work in print and having to do something of professional standards.
Jerry hooked Steve up with Stan Lee at Atlas Comics, soon to become Marvel. Although Mr. Ditko hasn't worked full-time for any one comic book company for decades now, I felt my search wouldn't be complete unless I visited the home of his earliest triumphs, Marvel Comics in New York City, where there are still some who remember working with Steve in the early days. Although today Marvel is a multi-million-dollar organisation, back then, when Steve joined in 1956, there were just a handful of artists. Notable amongst them was the great Jack Kirby, widely accepted as the most influential comic book artist of all time. And of course, there was Stan Lee, writer and editor-in-chief. Apart from the comics, one of the few documents of that time is this rather strange record that Stan Lee made for the ever-growing Marvel readership.
Okay, out there in Marvel-land, face front, this is Stan Lee speaking. You've probably never heard a record like this before because no one would be nutty enough to make one with a bunch of offbeat artists, so anything is liable to happen.
You belong, you belong, you belong, you belong to the Merry Marvel Marching Society.
This flexi disc, given free to fan club members, featured the Merry Marvel Marching Society song and a few words from the comic creators themselves. But of course, the reclusive Steve Ditko is noticeably absent from the record.
Hey, what's all that commotion out there, Sol?
Why, it's Shy Steve Ditko. He heard you're making a record and he's got mic fright. Whoops, there he goes.
Out the window again? You know, I'm beginning to think he is Spider-Man.
You mean he isn't?
Be a good advisor.
Never ever vicious.
And when will you be there?
Say hello to the fans, Flo Steinberg.
Hello, fans. It's very nice to meet you.
Hello, I'm Flo Steinberg, and I had the distinct pleasure of working for Stan Lee at Marvel Comics from 1963 to 1968.
Okay, let him hear it, gang.
You would hear them shouting, or Stan would jump on the desk to make a point. I mean, they were superheroes. I wasn't actually in the room, but you could hear them through the thin walls shouting, and, you know, maybe sometime if something was going on in our office, we'd have to say, hey, keep it down, or something.
March along, march along, march along to the song.
Although Flo doesn't seem to have changed, over the years the rest of the staff have. Marvel has now grown into a corporation of over 500 workers.
Joe Quesada, I'm editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics.
Joe Quesada joined Marvel in the 90s and, of course, is an enormous fan of Ditko.
Between Kirby and Ditko, you had probably two of the best masters in the field. You know, Kirby with the way that his characters moved in that very big, over-dramatic sense, and Steve with a much more subtler approach, but yet creating iconic imagery like Spider-Man shooting the webs. Steve was also creating costumes for characters that had never really been seen before. You know, at that point, it was all traditionally, hey, put the guy's underwear over the tights. It was sort of the strong man in the circus kind of costume.
There's the belt with the buckle, the gloves,
the boots, the whole thing, right? And yet Steve created this bizarre, and I could only put it in the time and place, because to me, I see Spider-Man now and it's commonplace. But I could only imagine when this was created in '62 that people looking at it going, that's the weirdest costume ever. And his face is covered, which is, you know, a huge change from what has come before. Where usually characters, if they're getting masked, they wear the cowl with a little domino mask kind of thing. That's one of the reasons why Spider-Man is so relatable. When he puts on that mask, he could be anyone.
Cool Spidey outfit. Thanks. Where'd you get it? I made it. Looks uncomfortable. It gets kind of itchy.
In the years following Steve Ditko's decision to leave Spider-Man, the character's popularity continued to boom. There was this rather poor animation series in 1967, although, admittedly, that's one hell of a catchy tune. The 70s saw Spidey go live action with this TV series filled with overacting extras.
Did you see that? Did you see it, Captain? That's the Spider-Man, the guy in the paper. Who is that character, anyway?
And this rather brilliant oddity from Turkey shows a different side to Spider-Man, casting him as a ruthless, evil sadist.
Çalıştırın.
No two ways about it, Spider-Man is big business on a global scale. And it all stems from those early days back in the Marvel offices.
My name is Ralph Macchio, and I am one of the senior editors up here at Marvel Comics.
Ralph Macchio has worked at Marvel for 30 years, editing the adventures of Spider-Man and Daredevil, among others, and he has first-hand experience of working with Steve Ditko.
It was fascinating because he would sit there with me over my shoulder and he would go through every single page, panel by panel. And it was like watching a master at work, because I would be able to see how he would solve story problems. And he would just sit there, he'd have the plot on one side, he'd be over my shoulder, he'd have the paper in front of me, do it on loose leaf paper, and he would go into this, and this. The writer had a problem here, and I solved it this way. And you would just watch this guy, who was really a genius at storytelling, solve all these problems. And then once I approved it, as if I was ever not going to approve anything Steve Ditko did, he would take it, he would go away, a couple of weeks later he'd come back, and all the pencils would be done.
Although we've spoken almost exclusively about Spider-Man, there was another creation of Ditko's that was cleaning up with the fans. He was never as popular as Spider-Man, never will be, although he continues to crop up in other comic books, and every few years Marvel Comics dust him off and give him a new series. He was a surgeon, perhaps the greatest in the world.